Monster Hunter World Iceborne is a wonderful gaming experience with a whole host of content that Capcom has supported over the past few years, but now we have access to all the game has to offer and we can work towards the best builds possible in the game. So I'm Darcblade with the best of the best builds for the Switch axe in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now when I say a best of the best build, I mean a build that is constructed from some of the rarest armor, weaponry and jewels in the game. This gives hunters some of the strongest sets possible. For this series I'll be featuring 4 builds for each of the various weapons in the game, which should cater to a variety of playstyles. When it comes to the Switch axe, it's a strong DPS orientated weapon, but at times it can be complicated to use. This is because there is a variety of ways to actually play the Switch axe, but regardless, whether you prefer to play in sword mode, axe mode, or just spam the zero sum discharge, you'll find a build here that should suit your needs. So the first build is the best of the best raw attack build. This is a DPS build that focuses on high raw attack above everything else. But nonetheless, this build has a ton of quality of life options, making it a decent all-round DPS build that can take on pretty much any monster in the game, thanks to the fact that we are focusing on raw attack rather than elemental or ailments. So, for this you'll need the entire Fatalis set, which includes the Dragon Head Beta, Dragon Hide Beta, Dragon Claws Beta, Dragon Bars Beta, and Dragon Feet Beta. I'm also using a Challenger Charm 5, and for my weapon I'm using the True Fatalis End. This has a health regen augmentation and an attack increase augmentation. As for the specialist tools, these are down to personal preference, so I've gone for Temporal and Rocksteady Mantles, as both these mantles help the playstyle that favours the zero sum discharge spam. So when it comes to the jewels, you've got a ton to play around with. First of all, I've gone for attack jewels for the attack boost skill. I've then gone for expert jewels for the critical eye skill, challenger jewels to max out agitator, tenderizer jewels to max out weakness exploit, evasion jewels to max out evade window, critical jewels for crit boost, enhancer jewels for the power prolonger skill, protection jewels for divine blessing, handicraft jewels for a little bit of extra sharpness, and jumping jewels for the evade extender skill. As for the jewels on the mantles, these are down to personal preference, so I've gone for maintenance jewels. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 200 health, 200 stamina, regardless of if you've taken consumables or not. You'll have a raw attack of 1600, at least when you're in sword mode. This will be slightly less in axe mode. You have purple sharpness with 15% base affinity. This can be potentially 85% when you take into account the agitator buff as well as weakness exploit. You have a dragon rating of 150 with high elder seal, and you have power files. You'll also have a strong defense of 1121 that is exceedingly strong against water and thunder, neutral against ice, but unfortunately weak to fire and especially dragon. So when it comes to the skills, you have attack boost at level 7. This will increase the raw attack of a build, and at level 4 or above it also provides us a bonus 5% extra affinity. I should point out that yes, I do have an exceedingly large amount of attack jewels on this build, but as long as you can get attack boost to at least level 4, you should be fine. Anyway, next up is Critical Eye at level 7, which increases the base affinity of this build, good for countering the negative affinity found on the True Fatalis End. You have Agitator at level 7, which is a buff that kicks in whenever a monster becomes enraged. When this happens, you'll gain increased raw attack as well as bonus affinity. And as you can easily control when a monster becomes enraged thanks to the whole flint shot mechanic, this buff should be active for a large portion of the hunt. You also have Evade Window at level 5, which is a useful defensive skill that gives us increased invincibility frames when we perform dodges and evades. This also applies to the Switch axe when it comes to its little hops. This ultimately allows us to roll through attacks and continue our assault. You also have Divine Blessing at level 5, another useful defensive skill. Divine Blessing gives us a chance at taking reduced damage when we take a hit from a monster. You also have Stun Resistance at level 3. Stun Resistance makes us completely immune to stun effects when we're using this build. Normally I tend to drop this, as Stun Resistance isn't really the most useful of skills unless you intend to get hit. And when it comes to the zero sum discharge spam playstyle, this playstyle has a greater chance of you being hit, thus Stun Resistance is slightly more useful. Anyway, you also have Critical Boost level 3, which is a skill that gives us increased damage when our attacks crit a monster. However, this only applies to the raw portion of an attack rather than the elemental or ailment portion. But as this build is all about raw attack, this Critical Boost skill is very useful. You also have Weakness Exploit level 3, which is a skill that grants us bonus affinity should we be attacking monster weak points. And should these weak points be tenderized through Clutch Claw attacks first, this increase to our affinity is even greater. Weakness Exploit at level 3 can potentially provide us a bonus 50% extra affinity. You also have Power Prolonger level 3, which is a skill that allows the Switch axe to remain powered up for longer periods. You'll also have Evade Extender at level 3, which increases the distance at which we roll and hop with this build. This is a quality of life skill that I tend to always use with the switch axe, as it counters the slow mobility issues that the weapon has, especially whilst in its sword form. Anyway, you'll have handicraft at level 2, which increases the sharpness of this weapon slightly, and finally when you're wearing your mantles, you'll have tool specialist at level 2, reducing the cooldown on our specialist tools slightly. Now when it comes to the set bonuses, you'll have 2 of them, both tied to the Fatalis legend. For wearing 2 pieces of the Fatalis armor, you'll get the inheritance set bonus, which allows us to break the level cap on certain skills. With this build, it allows us to get the agitator skill from level 5 to a maximum of level 7, and allows us to get the divine blessing skill from level 3 to level 5, both enhancing our DPS and defense slightly. On top of that, for wearing 4 pieces of the Fatalis armor, you'll get the transcendence set bonus. This gives us 200 health and 200 stamina, regardless of if we've taken consumables or not. This eliminates the need for vitality jewels and such. But on top of that, it also provides us the true razor sharp skill, which severely reduces our sharpness loss when we're attacking monsters. So there you have it. As you can see, it's a decent all-round build with a lot of offensive options, defensive options, and quality of life options. You can, if you want, change some of these about. For example, if you don't have as many attack jewels, you can add some more defensive or quality of life options if you so wish. Or alternatively, if you don't have an issue with the duration that the switch axe remains charged, you can drop the enhancer jewels if you so wish for something like flawless jewels to enhance your DPS even more. But every build out there has pros and cons. When it comes to this build, its biggest pro is its damage output. Having one of the highest raw attacks in the game, you're easily able to take down monsters quickly and efficiently. It means that you also don't really have to worry about their elemental or ailment weaknesses, meaning that you can use this weapon against pretty much any monster. The next pro is that this build comes with a lot of defensive and quality of life options, making hunts feel a lot more easier than they are. And then finally for the pros is the Fatalis Legend set bonus itself, providing us 2 strong skills that enhance our DPS, quality of life, and defense. But of course there are cons. The 2 major cons with this build is, unfortunately, despite having true razor sharp and a few points in handicraft, sharpness can still be an issue at times, meaning that we can drop from purple sharpness into white or even blue sharpness at times, which reduces our overall DPS. And on top of that, the final con is that unfortunately this is a very jewel heavy build, requiring some of the rarest jewels in the game, which can be difficult to obtain. But nonetheless, if you're able to get your hands on them, you'll have one of the strongest switch axe builds in the game, able to take on pretty much any monster regardless of their elemental or ailment defenses. And on top of that, this can cater to any switch axe playstyle, making it probably one of the best switch axe builds out there. So let's move on to the next switch axe build, which is the best of the best elemental switch axe build. This build is all about elemental damage, making use of power element files found on certain switch axes, which will allow us to bring down monsters quickly, so long as we're taking into account their elemental resistances. So for this build you'll need the full Safi Jiva set, which includes the Safi Crested Crown Beta, the Safi Crested Chest Beta, the Safi Crested Van Braces Beta, Safi Crested Belt Beta, and Safi Crested Boots Beta. I'm also using a Frost Charm 5 as we are demonstrating an ice build here. Of course, if you were using a different weapon with a different element, you would replace the Frost Charm to match whatever new element you were using. And finally for my weapon I'm using the Kiar Axe Stream, which has a health regen augmentation and then elemental up augmentation. As for the specialist tools, again they're down to personal preference, so I've gone for temporal and rocksteady mantles. So when it comes to the jewels, first of all I've gone for jumping jewels for the evade extender skill, I've then gone for evasion jewels for evade window, vitality jewels for health boost, a sharp jewel for protective polish, attack jewels for the attack boost skill, tenderizer jewels for weakness exploit, a resistor jewel which is optional for the blight resistance skill, and then finally a frost jewel to max out the ice attack skill. Of course, like I mentioned with the Frost Charm, if you were using a different weapon with a different element, you'd replace this individual Frost Jewel to match whatever new element you were using. As for the jewels on the mantles, I've gone for attack jewels to add some more attack boost to this build. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You'll have a raw attack of 1047 with a decent chunk of white sharpness. You'll have 60% base affinity, which can easily be 100% when you take into account weakness exploit, and you'll have an elemental ice rating of 1460 at least while in sword mode. Please note that both the elemental and base affinity ratings shown here are with the true Dragon Vein Awakening buff in effect, and you'll have power element files. You'll also have a decent defense of 1081 that is strong against every element, especially fire, but unfortunately weak to dragon. So when it comes to the skills, first of all you have ice attack at level 6, this increases the ice rating and thus ice damage of this build. Of course, if you were using a different element, then you would replace ice attack to match whatever new element you were using. You have evade window at level 5, attack boost at level 4, which can be potentially level 6 when you're wearing your mantles. You have health boost level 3, which is a skill that allows our health to get to that potential maximum of 200. You have blight resistance level 3, which is a quality of life skill that allows us to ignore all elemental blights on our hunter. You also have critical boost level 3. Please note that with critical boost, it doesn't increase the elemental damage of our attacks when they crit a monster, only the raw attack. You have weakness exploit at level 3, evade extender level 3, protected polish level 1, which is a useful buff, especially when a build doesn't have a lot of handicraft. Protected polish allows you to put a protective coating over your sharpness gauge whenever you sharpen your weapon, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration of time. You also have critical element level 1, which is like critical boost but applies to the elemental portion of an attack, so when our hits crit a monster, they'll deal increased elemental damage. And then finally for the set bonus, you have the Safi Jiva's Seal, True Dragon Vein Awakening. This is a buff that kicks in whenever you have your weapon drawn. With your weapon drawn, you'll gain increased base affinity as well as increased elemental damage. But unfortunately there is a downside to this. With each swing of your weapon, regardless of if you hit a monster or not, you'll drain some of your health, leaving a portion of red health on your health bar, which can build up and leave you at risk of carting. But should you be accurate with your attacks and they constantly hit a monster for a small duration of time, then after a certain number of hits, the True Dragon Vein Awakening will initiate a heal, healing you for the health it drained. So, as always, it's a risk-reward set bonus. But regardless, if you're looking for an elemental build, you prefer to use the elemental weapons and the elemental systems found in Monster Hunter, this is one I can strongly recommend. But of course, every build out there has pros and cons. When it comes to this build, its biggest pro is its elemental damage output. So long as you're researching your monsters, countering them with the correct elements, you're able to bring them down quickly and effectively. On top of that, this build has quite a few quality of life options. From evade window, health boost to blight resistance, these all add to the quality of a hunt, making it feel slightly easier than it is. And then finally for the pros is the True Dragon Vein Awakening, which provides us 2 strong DPS buffs for simply having our weapon drawn. But unfortunately there are cons to this build, the biggest being the True Dragon Vein Awakening health drain, which can leave us at risk. This is countered slightly thanks to the health regen augmentation, but nonetheless it's something you need to be aware of. And the other con is, unfortunately, again, sharpness can be an issue with this build, so it's something you need to be mindful of. But regardless, if you're looking for a strong elemental build to use, I strongly recommend this one. It can get away with using pretty much any of the Kya weapons, so can be applied to pretty much all the elements in the game, so just remember to take into account a monster's elemental weakness, and you'll be in for some quick hunts. Which brings us on to the third build, which is the best of the best crowd controlling switch axe build. Now the third build featured in these videos are normally niche builds, quirky builds, maybe not the most meta out there, but nonetheless are interesting enough. This build is all about crowd controlling a monster, paralysing them or exhausting them. So for this you'll need the Golden Loon Helm beta, the Golden Loon Mail beta, the Dragon Claws beta, Golden Loon Coil beta and the Dragon Feet beta. I'm also using a Master's Charm 5 and for my weapon I'm using the Safi Bind Axe. For the awakened abilities on this weapon I've gone for status effect ups, exhaust files and a sharpness increase. You'll also want to get a Gold Raffian Essence awakened ability on this weapon for this build to work. As for the augmentations, I've gone for a health regen augmentation and then status effect up augmentation. As for the specialist tools, these are down to personal preference, so again I've gone for temporal and rocksteady mantles. So when it comes to the jaws, you've got a fair few to play around with. So I've gone for Paralyzer jaws for the paralysis attack skill, Tenderizer jaws for weakness exploit, Challenger jaw to max out agitator, critical jaws for the crit boost skill, Vitality jaws for health boost, Evasion jaws for evade window, Expert jaws for critical eye, and finally a Fortitude jaw for the fortify skill. As for the jaws on the mantles, I've simply gone for attack jaws for the attack boost skill. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You'll have a raw attack of 998 with a decent chunk of white sharpness. You have 45% base affinity, which can easily be 100% when you take into account the buff from the agitator skill as well as weakness exploit. This could be considered overkill in all honesty, so you can potentially drop a point in weakness exploit if you so desire. You also have a paralysis rating of 480 with exhaust files, and you have a decent defense of 1067 that is strong against fire and dragon, neutral against ice but unfortunately weak to thunder and water. Now when it comes to the skills, first of all you'll have Critical Eye at level 7, you'll then have Agitator at level 7, Evade Window at level 5, Divine Blessing at level 5, you'll have Paralysis Attack at level 4, which increases the paralysis rating and thus the build up of this ailment when using this build, allowing us to paralyze a monster more often, leaving them open for our longer, stronger, harder hitting combos. You also have Health Boost at level 3, Critical Boost at level 3, Weakness Exploit at level 3, Fortify at level 1, which is a useful skill when it comes to difficult hunts. Fortify is a skill or buff that kicks in whenever you cart and faint. When this happens, you'll come back with increased raw attack and defense. This can be applied twice to a hunter during a hunt. You'll also have Attack Boost at level 2 when you're wearing your mantles, and when it comes to the set bonus, you'll have 3 of them, 2 of them tied to the Gold Rathian Essence. For 2 pieces of the Gold Rathian set, you'll get the Divine Blessing Secret, allowing us to get the Divine Blessing skill from level 3 to a maximum of level 5. And for wearing the 4-piece set, you'll get True Critical Status. This increases the paralysis status effect when our attacks crit a monster, potentially allowing us to paralyze them more often. And then finally you'll have the Fatalis Legend Inheritance bonus, which we talked about in the first build, allowing us to break the level cap on certain skills. So there you have it. As you can see, it's quite a quirky build. It may not be the highest DPS build out there, but nonetheless it allows you to crowd control a monster quite effectively and easily. So when it comes to the pros for this build, its biggest pro is its crowd controlling capabilities, able to paralyze a monster or exhaust them, leaving them vulnerable for your stronger, harder hitting attacks. On top of that, this build has quite a few defensive and quality of life options, from Evade Window to Divine Blessing to Health Boost and more. It all adds to the quality of a hunt. And then finally, when it comes to the pros, the way we've got this build set up, you don't really have to worry about sharpness too much, thanks to the fact that we have a large amount of white sharpness. But unfortunately, again, there are cons to every build. The first con is, unfortunately, you need the Gold Rathian Essence Awakened ability on your weapon for this build to work. And the other con is, unfortunately, the exhaust effect of this weapon will be lost when it comes to the majority of Elder Dragons, as they are not affected by the exhaust effect. But regardless, if you're looking for a quirky build that can crowd control enemies, maybe you're looking to fulfill a certain role when playing in a group, I can strongly recommend this Switch Axe build. Which brings us on to our fourth and final build, which is the best of the best Guiding Lands Switch Axe build. This is a build that's all about raw attack, but comes with all the essential skills that you need for farming the Guiding Lands effectively and efficiently. So, for this build you'll need the Dragon Head Beta, the Dragon Hide Beta, Dragon Claws Beta, Dragon Barbs Beta, and Dragon Feet Beta. Again, I'm using a Challenger Charm 5, and for my weapon I'm using the True Fatalis End, that has a health regen augmentation and then attack increase augmentation. As for the specialist tools, these are down to personal preference, so again I've gone for Temporal and Rocksteady Mantles as always. Now when it comes to the jaws, first of all you'll need a Hard Geology jaw for the Geologist skill. I've then gone for Destroyer jaws for Part Breaker, Evasion jaws for Evade Window, Challenger jaws for the Agitated skill, Expert jaws for Critical Eye, Fortitude jaw for the Fortify skill, Attack jaws for the Attack Boost skill, Jumping jaws for the Evade Extender skill, Handicraft jaws for the Handicraft skill, Tenderizer jaws for Weakness Exploit, Protection jaws for Divine Blessing, and Critical jaws for the Critical Boost skill. As for the jaws and the mantles, I've simply gone for Attack jaws again. So if you've done what I've done here, you have a build with 200 health, 200 stamina, regardless of if you've taken consumables or not. You have a raw attack of 1565 with a decent chunk of purple sharpness. You have 15% base affinity, which can be potentially 85% when you take into account the buff from Agitator as well as Weakness Exploit. You have a dragon rating of 150 with high Elder Seal, and you have power files. You again also have a strong defense of 1121 that is strong against water and thunder, neutral against ice, but unfortunately weak to fire and dragon. Now when it comes to the skills, these are very similar to the first build featured in this video. First of all, you'll have Critical Eye at level 7, you'll then have Agitator at level 7, Evade Window at level 5, Divine Blessing at level 5, Attack Boost at level 4, which can be potentially level 6 when we're wearing our mantles. You have Stun Resistance at level 3, Critical Boost at level 3, Weakness Exploit at level 3, Part Breaker at level 3. Part Breaker is an essential skill for the Guiding Lands, as it allows us to break monster body parts more easily, and when it comes to the Guiding Lands, this allows us to knock off monster materials more easily, which ultimately leads to more loot. You also have Evade Extender level 3, Geologist at level 3, which is another essential Guiding Lands skill, although you only really need it at level 1, but given the jaw sockets we had, we might as well get it to level 3. Geologist is a skill that allows us to loot the monster materials that we knock off from them twice instead of once, at least from the high tier monsters. On top of that, Geologist at level 3 allows us to loot the bone piles and mining nodes additional times, leading to more loot overall when farming the area. You also have Handicraft level 2, and finally Fortify at level 1. Again, for the set bonus, you have the Fatalis Legend, providing us the Inheritance set bonus, as well as Transcendence set bonus. So there you have it. As you can see, it's very similar to the first build featured in this video, but it's more catered to farming the Guiding Lands more than anything else. But even this build has pros and cons. For this build, its biggest pro is its raw damage output, able to take on monsters quickly and efficiently regardless of their elemental resistances, as this build has a very high raw attack rating. On top of that, this build has all the skills associated with the Guiding Lands, allowing you to farm the area quickly and effectively, whilst yielding a decent amount of rewards. And then finally for the pros is the Fatalis Legend, which provides us a set bonus that increases our overall attack, defense and quality of life. But of course there are cons. Again, they're very similar to the first build. Basically the cons include the fact that we can have sharpness issues with this build, so you need to be aware of it. And then finally, again for the cons, this is a jewel heavy build requiring some of the rarest jewels in the game, which can be difficult to obtain at times. But these are supposed to be the best of the best builds out there, so if you're looking for a very strong build to take into the Guiding Lands to farm the endgame area, this is one I strongly recommend. So there we have it, those are the best of the best builds for the Switch Axe. Now these builds are aimed to be strong general builds, able to take on pretty much any task in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. But if you wanted to take on a tougher monster, something more specific like Elatrion or Fatalis, then some adjustments may be needed here and there. They also may be slightly different from other meta builds featured in the community, but regardless, these are the strongest builds that I personally like to use in the game, and I hope they help you out too. So until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you the best of the best Switch Axe builds in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.